is a snow day. There is not much snow outside where I am, but up at the location of my school campus yesterday, it was coming down really hard. And as I was walking through it to get home, people on the street trying to get up the hill were getting stuck and sliding backwards, and tires rolling and getting nowhere. It was just utter chaos. And so I don't know what it's like up at school today, but I know that we got a snow day, and I'm really good with that. I thought that I would take advantage of it to try to record my wrap up for November. So many books read in November, many of them from actually, as I'm looking at it, I'm like, actually, I read every book that was on that small 10 stack that the spinning wheel gave me. I got to one more that I just pulled because I really felt like reading it out of order from the greater stack of, I think it was 44 books. And then I have a bunch of books I read that were not on my radar at all for one reason or another. So I'm going to start with the books that came in to my library, or the books that I was suddenly approved for through NetGalley and really wanted to read right then and right there. So I don't have physical copies of many of my books this month. So there'll be lots of pictures to start with, and then we'll get into the physical books that I read. So of course I read Nemesis by Agatha Christie, which was super fun. I gave it 5 stars. It was so unique. It was the story of a dead man trying to get Agatha Christie to solve a mystery for him. And it was fun and a little bit less logical, I think, than a lot of Agatha Christie can be, but I really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, 5 stars for that one. I only have one Miss Marple left, which I'm reading in December. I also watched The Tempest. I did not read The Tempest. This has become the pattern since I moved into this apartment. For whatever reason, I just am not reading the Shakespeare of the month. I am watching it. I've already read them multiple times, and actually the whole month of October and November I was teaching Macbeth, so I actually read that 4 times in the last 2 months, Macbeth, and that probably racks up my Macbeth reading total to I don't even know. But the assignment for the month with my group was The Tempest, and I did not read it, but I did got my hold in of The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper, which is the sequel to The Wolf's Den. I read The Wolf's Den earlier this year or maybe late last year, I'm not sure, with my book group, my In Real Life book group, which I have been taking a break from. And actually, I don't know if they've met without me or not. Sometimes it's hard to get together. But I have been taking a break from them, but I read with them, either the end of last year or sometime earlier this year, The Wolf's Den. And then I was waiting eagerly for the sequel to come out. It is a trilogy, so there will be one more book, and each one does end on an important cliffhanger. So more waiting, but these books are so interesting to me. They are told in such a sparse, spare, kind of overly simplistic way, in my opinion. The language used, the sentence structure, the storytelling devices, and yet I am completely enthralled. I just need to know what is going to happen for these women and whether or not they are going to be able to make their way, or whether or not this is going to be just the saddest trilogy on the planet. But I highly recommend this series. There are trigger warnings galore in the stories of these women. And in case you're not familiar, it takes place in Pompeii, obviously before the eruption, quite a bit before the eruption of Vesuvius. And it's just about that culture and the lives of women in that culture. So, and I gotta tell you, nobody's got it good. No woman's got it okay in Pompeii. Ooh, that rhymed. The Secrets of Heartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden, of Books and Things on BookTube. She has written just the most fabulous historical fiction book. I knew that I would love it because Katie wrote it. Like, I knew. And I have been watching Katie since long before I was on BookTube, way back when she was doing... Oh, Lola's barking at something. Way back. It's okay, Lola. Nobody's gonna steal. She's got a pig's ear to chew on here, and now she is afraid that whoever is walking outside is going to steal it. Lola, nobody's gonna take your pig's ear, baby. Hellos. All right, go get him. Go get him. Go get him. Oh, so vicious. So vicious. So vicious. Look at these heckles. Look at these heckles. What is it? Oh. Oh, I can see it now. It's a cat. Oh my goodness. And she really is afraid that it's going to take her pig's ear. Nobody's going to take your pig's ear, baby. They're not. They're not going to do it. I'm going to try to continue. Well, she's not going to chill out until the cat is gone. And there might also be a UPS man out there. Anyway, Katie has written the most lovely historical fiction set in the Victorian period. And I was lucky enough to receive an ARC copy on NetGalley. And I dropped everything and read it immediately. And I don't read very quickly on my Kindle. And I read it in 2 days with work and everything else going on. It was just really, really, really wonderful. There was a UPS man. I'm going to go grab those packages off of the front porch. And now he's leaving so she can see him again. A cat, a UPS man, and a pig's ear. Triple whammy. It's a trifecta. You gonna lay down? I gotta tell you that I'm about to ruin your safety right now because I have to go get the packages off the front porch. Oh, thank you. You want me to hold on to that? I'm gonna put it here and I'm gonna go get the packages. Hang on. Okay. Katie's book. It is called The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. Heartwood Hall is the house in which this story takes place. It begins like every great Victorian novel should, in a rainstorm with a traveling woman who happens to be a governess arriving at a place because she has secrets, only to find that the place she's at has secrets too. And it's just so fun. And one of the really wonderful things about it, and one of my reading goals for next year based on this, is that she just drops so many Victorian novel titles. Many of them, most of us here on BookTube would probably be aware of. But there are some in there that I've never heard of before. And so I think that for Victober, I am going to pull together a list of books from The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. And I am going to build my TBR for Victober in 2023 around that. It is such a readable, wonderful hug of a novel. It is exactly what I didn't know that I wanted. It was like getting a new Victorian novel that you knew was going to be wonderful. And it is an excellent book. So I was really excited to get that and really excited that I loved it so much because I knew that I would praise it, but I want to make it very clear that I am praising it because it is an excellent book. And I will be highly recommending it for years to come. Oh, then I got a hold from my library called Funny Farm by Lori Zaleski. This is a non-fiction book about a woman who has taken into her home farm over 600 strays and abandoned animals, barnyard, domesticated, not tropical, but wild, weird, interesting. There's a word that I can't remember right now. Animals that have just been abandoned or neglected or donated, didn't have anywhere to go. And she's cared for over 600 in her lifetime. But it is also her memoir. And if you really, really want to hate someone, listen to her talk about her father, who was a real piece of work. However, that being said, The majority of this book is extremely life-affirming, extremely uplifting, extremely feel-good. I don't always feel comfortable listening to books or reading books in which I know that animals are going to be discussed, feeling harm or scare, or like fear or confusion. That's really, really not something that I am okay with reading or watching, for that matter. And although there's trigger warnings for like animal cruelty in this, she's relaying stories of animal cruelty, and you're hearing it from a woman who you know can't handle that either. And you know that there's so much love and care and compassion for these animals coming from the voice that's telling you these stories. So I highly recommend this book, and it's her life story. Her life story just happens to include and revolve around animals. She's also a graphic designer, owns her own business, has done graphic design for the White House and all sorts of things. She's a really amazing human being, and I highly, highly recommend this book. I highly recommend the audiobook. I would like to buy myself a physical copy because there are some things in it that I'd like to reference in the future. But for my personal enjoyment, if and when I read this book again in the future, I will do so through the audiobook again, because listening to her tell her own story is just delightful and impactful. I'm only halfway through this one. I'll finish it in early December. That is Sister Novelists by Devoni. Ooh, I cannot read what I wrote on my paper. So you're going to have to read it from the picture that I put up here in the corner. But Devoni L. And she has written a really detailed, really wonderful biography of author sisters who were contemporaries of Jane Austen, who we don't read anymore. They are the Porter sisters. And right now I'm reading their biography, and it is fascinating. And this biography is not just about them, it's about the culture in which they are living. It's another take on the Regency. And right now it's talking about, where I am in the book right now, it's talking about how like the kind of like actors circle that one of the sisters found themselves kind of involved in, and this uncomfortable three-way romance she accidentally gets caught up in. It's really heartbreaking and fascinating and informative and well written. And I'm learning about the Porter sisters, but they're also just two women from the Regency period, right? Who happen to be writers, two women living kind of outside of the norm. And for one of the sisters, they were prolific writers. I'm going to have to get my hands on their books. The book is dense, right? The biography is dense. It's fascinating. It's compelling. I'm loving listening to it. I listen to it on my commute to and from work, but it's dense, and it's the kind of information that I want to pore over and read. So I need to get a physical copy of this book and reread it, but I want to finish listening to it because I want to know what happens to these women, and I want to know what other kinds of information is going to be revealed in the book. So I'll finish listening to it, and then probably in January I'll get myself a physical copy of it. It is so good. It is so good. I am interested to know what happens to them. Oh, but I was going to say that it's about these women who are just Regency women, but also they are living kind of on the outskirts of what's acceptable for women at that time. And one of the sisters has just been told by their publisher that they should put their name on the book. Up to that point, they had not listed their names on the books at all. Kind of like Jane Austen had not put her name on her books either. And now their books have been taken and turned into plays that have been very popular, things like that. And people are starting to make guesses about who the authors of these books are. And they're being told by their publisher that it's in their best interest to reveal themselves. And revealing themselves is a dangerous move. So yeah, I'm excited to finish that one, and will finish it. I'm not rushing or anything like that. I'm really enjoying it. But yeah, here are the rest of the books that I read. I read this beautiful book. Let me just take the cover off here so that you can see what the book underneath the cover looks like. It's so pretty. And this book is called The Corgi and the Queen. I didn't quite get the cover back on, but that's okay. The Corgi and the Queen. It's by Carolyn L. Perry and Lydia Corey. And this is the story of Queen Elizabeth II, but also of her first personal, not her first corgi ever, like they had family corgis, but her first corgi that she was given as a puppy that she raised, named Susan. And I did not know this, but almost every generation of corgis that she had was from Susan's line. And until the more recent, I think last 2 or 3 corgis that she had. And it's the story of England, because it goes into the wars and all of that stuff. And it's the story of Elizabeth going from being just a princess, to queen. And it's the story of Susan, her corgi, and all of Susan's descendants. And it's just really beautiful. The pictures are beautiful. The storytelling is beautiful. It'd be a great read aloud book. And then also it's got these 2 family trees, one for Elizabeth and one for Susan. It's really, really wonderful. This would make such a great Christmas gift. But it's also just a great book for reading aloud or for early readers to read to themselves. Lovely, lovely nonfiction picture book. Well written. I read this in one sitting on Thanksgiving, cried my way through the entire thing, Lost Companions. It's not quite what I thought it was when I decided or agreed that I would read it. I had a friend tell me right after the death of my Joey that I should read Lost Companions. And I thought that it was going to be a series of stories about people who had loved dogs and lost them, but that's not what it is. The author does talk about dogs that he's lost. He also talks about a dog that through the writing of the book, a family dog that through the process of the writing of the book is in his last year. But it is really just a series of essays. Each chapter is an essay about something related to animals, mostly pets, but there is a whole chapter about how do we respond to the loss of wild animals when we see that. And experience that. Lola, are you chewing? Are you chewing on your own collar? Huh? She chews on the tags on her collar. The loss of wild animals. There's also a whole thing on euthanasia, which is really hard to read. He starts by talking about like how we use euthanasia among humans, and the ethics or lack of ethics of that, the morality question of that, and then starts to address it to when we say goodbye to pets. I have to sneeze. It's really, really well done. It's really interesting. There's a lot of things in here that I kind of pseudo disagree with, but there's also a lot of things in here that he states really clearly that I felt that I didn't have words for. I think that it is a really important book, and if I'd had the courage to read it earlier, I think it could have really helped even in the very early stages of grief. And I will say that one of the most important messages that's in this book is something that I already knew, but a lot of people I think struggle with, that grief for a pet is sometimes more intense than grief for a human and can last a really long time. And he just really says that's normal and that's okay. And he, for those of you who are logical thinkers and need a little bit more permission than that, he gives it. he gets it. So it's a really great book. Like I said, I bawled through the entire thing, but I read the entire thing, and I would recommend it. I read Fierce Bad Rabbits by Claire Pollard, the Tales Behind Children's Pictures books, and this was fun. A lot of the picture books were picture books that I did not grow up reading, but some of them were, and I really enjoyed those chapters a lot more. It's not really broken into chapter by chapter. It's more like topic by topic. So this was a good read, but this was not a great read. I enjoyed it. If you really are into picture books or illustration, or if you maybe teach early, like preschool, kindergarten, you might want to pick that up. I don't know that I will be recommending it far and wide, though. It was a little bit dry. And like I said, a lot of the books were not books that I was personally familiar with, which was a little bit of a bummer. I read The Princess Will Save You. This was a fun ride. This was definitely YA. It is very plot driven. There is character development. Like, you do get attached to the characters. They do grow a little bit. But really, like, it is extremely character driven. Hi, baby. It starts with, a father who has died. He is a king, and he has left no instructions for an heir. He has a daughter, and she assumes that she will take the throne because she's the next in line in the family line. But their laws say that women can't rule the country or the kingdom, and so she just basically says change the law. She goes in and she talks to all of the people who would the advisors of her father, her dead father, and she says change the law, just make it happen. I'm gonna be queen and you're gonna make me queen. But that's not necessarily what happens. The book is about how or if she will be able to take power and how that will come about. I finally read My Good Life in France. This had been on multiple TBRs from the summer till now, and I finally got to it, and I'm so glad that I did. I loved this. I'm going to say this phrase because in my world, for context, I read a lot of these kinds of books where just individuals mostly British, have left the UK and purchased a home in rural France. And it's the story of how they fix up this home and learn to live, how different French culture is from British culture. And I would say that in the last decade, I have probably read at least 50 of these books. Most of them are self-published, and most of them are found on Kindle. It's one of the few things that I really use my Kindle for. So when I say My Good Life in France, In Pursuit of the Rural Dream by Janine Marsh is nothing special, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it's just what I wanted. It's exactly the same as every other book in this genre that I have read, and that is what I wanted. So I gave it 5 stars because it's exactly what I wanted, but it's nothing special as well. Like, there's a general formula, but what fascinates me, I think, is really that they are all the same. Like, there's so many people who have done this, and it turns out very similarly for all of them. What are you doing? You weirdo. I love you too. Yeah, she's tired. Her unique voice, but this same kind of French fantasy formula, and I just really enjoy it. So I would recommend those, but I know they're not everybody's cup of tea. I read The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. This was my very first Kate Morton, and I'm in love. I absolutely loved this. It does get a little bit long. I do think that this could have been about 150 to 200 pages shorter than it actually was. However, I do really, really love a book set in Australia, a historical fiction set in Australia. And I do really love Kate Morton's writing style. I love, storylines where history impacts the present. I love a little mystery, but the mystery is not necessarily the main thing. The characters and the vibe are the main thing, and all of that is there in Kate Morton. And I'm so glad that I just finally picked up a Kate Morton, because now I know that I love her, and there are so many books by Kate Morton. I'm really excited to dive into more of them. But The Forgotten Garden, because it was my first, is always going to have a very special place in my heart. The Forgotten Garden starts with, it starts on a ship with a little girl who's been told to just sit right there and not to move. And then the ship takes off, and when it docks, they realize the people at the that check in the passengers, the man that checks in the passengers at the dock, realize that this little girl has nobody. She just has her tiny little child's suitcase, and they take her in and they raise her as their own. And then when she comes of age at her birthday party, they reveal to her that she's not really theirs. And it kind of throws her whole world, her whole identity into whack. And it's partly the mystery of who she really is and what really happened. Why this happened, why she was abandoned, why she was sent off on this ship. But it's also the story of her granddaughter. It's really great. It's a really, really great book. I loved it. And if you already read Kate Morton and you know, then yay, I'm part of the club now. And if you've never read Kate Morton before and that sounds appealing, or I'm probably not doing it justice because I'm kind of distracted. I've got a dog laying on my lap and all sorts of stuff going on. I think that if you like historical fiction, you should pick it up. That's it. I read Pashmina by Nidhi Chinani. I'm not saying that correctly. I know I'm not, but that's how I'm going to say it for right now. This was a beautiful graphic novel about a young woman who is first generation American in her Indian family. She has a single mother. And she doesn't know her family history, and her mother refuses to talk about her father and won't let her go to India. She really wants to find herself. She wants to know who she is, where she comes from, and like her culture. And her mother is just kind of like, no, we're not talking about that. We're not dealing with that. We're not going to India. And then she finds this Pashmina shawl, and when she puts it on, she ends up magically traveling to some location in India and being guided by some animals, like some spirit animals. And this just really pushes her to push even harder to get to go like on a trip to India. And then one day her aunt, who lives in India, her mother's sister, calls, and they haven't talked since the mother left India, and it's a good conversation, and her mother is like, okay, actually you can go and visit your aunt. And so, yeah, there's a lot more going on, but that's the basic premise, and it's really lovely. Quick read, highly recommend. I read Hell Sands by Ever Dundas. This was fun. This was fast-paced. Oh my gosh, it's so fast-paced. It was also brutal. I did not anticipate... It's not body horror, because it's not a horror book. It's a sci-fi dystopian, but it's got a lot of like icky things to read about. It was very graphic, violently graphic. And yet the story is fascinating and really well told, extremely fast-paced. And also you're just kind of thrown into the society and how things work in this future. And nothing is really explained to you explicitly. You just have to pick it all up from context clues. And I think that that is one of the things that made the reading experience very difficult for me, because it is very explicitly violent. And I couldn't look away at any point. I couldn't skim read anything because I never knew what important piece of information about the society or the culture or the people was going to be revealed to me through any given part of the story. So I had to read every single word, like particularly. And sometimes every single word was really, really not what I wanted to be reading because it was so graphic. all of that to say, if you like a good, I almost said historical fiction. It is not historical fiction. If you like a good sci-fi, dystopian, very unique storyline, and also pretty interesting and compelling, like, storytelling devices, I do highly recommend this book. I think that a lot of people will really love it. It was just more... I just didn't know what I was getting into. It is quite violent. So just keep that in mind. However, basic premise is that it is about two women who live in this future society. They serve totally different roles in that society. They end up, in the very beginning, there's no spoilers here, they end up meeting at a party. They've both kind of been aware of the other for a long time. Through a series of events, there's some murders that kind of throw them even more in this society, that kind of throw them more into each other's paths. And everything revolves around, like, some government espionage stuff. And the government uses there's a lot of, like, Big Brother type stuff going on, but the government also uses this particular kind of font, which is kind of a mass population control. Like people who read things in this font have one of two responses to it. They're either violently reject it, their body violently rejects it, or their mind violently rejects it, and they become extremely ill and they have to be removed from society, or they embrace it and it makes them feel really, really wonderful and good and peaceful and compliant. And so everything that's official is kind of written in this font. It's a very compelling read, which I am glad that I read the story of, but really didn't enjoy the reading experience of all that much. Again, because there is so much violence and it is so vibrant on the page. I read Great or Nothing. This is by 4 authors. This is by Joy McCullough, Carolyn Tung Richmond, Tess Sharp, and Jessica Spotswood. And this is a retelling of Little Women. It's set in World War II. All the characters are there. They're all named what they should be named. Beth plays a different role in this imagining of the family. I don't want to give anything away, but just know that Beth plays a different role. The story is told from multiple perspectives. Each chapter belongs to a different sister. There's not like equal numbers to move the story forward. Like sometimes you'll have 4 Meg chapters in a row or whatever, but each chapter is told from a different perspective. Or not each chapter, but all the chapters. You will hear all of the sisters' perspectives. That's what I want to say. Some of them are written in prose and some of them are written in poetry, and it really works. Some of those poems were so impactful and powerful. I just loved the way that these authors, these women, got together and rewrote this story. And setting it in World War II was genius. It really retains... I've read a lot of Little Women retellings, and most of them disappoint me a lot. This one is a beautiful book in its own right, but it is also a really compelling and respectful and brilliant, dare I say, approach to the story of Little Women. And I think that it is very genuine to the spirit of Louisa May Alcott and who she really was, as opposed to, what she had to do for her publisher in order to get this book published and to make some money to feed her family, right? It feels like a reclaiming of the story, and yet it also does not in any way belittle the story that we know and love. It's a very, very, very unique approach, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend it. It is YA, and it didn't bother me at all. I read the second half of the Pickwick Papers and finished this up. This was my second reading of the Pickwick Papers, and I love the Pickwick Papers. I understand that this is not Dickens' greatest work. I understand that the characters are two-dimensional. I understand that women get a bad rap, but it is a beautiful story of friendship. It is the revelation of Charles Dickens becoming, moving from being a sketch writer, a comedy buffoon type person, into a social commentator, and the glimmers of genuine novel writer. I love everything about the Pickwick Papers. I loved it even more this time, knowing what was coming, being able to anticipate some of my favorite parts, having completely forgotten about certain parts and being able to focus on those because I know the other parts already. A reread of this book was just so beautiful. I listened to the whole thing this time instead of physically reading it, and laughed out loud through the entire thing. I mean, I was walking home listening to this and just cackling with laughter. It's so funny. And yet by the end, I did not cry this time. I cried at the end of the first time because my time with the Pickwickians was done and I wasn't ready, and I hadn't anticipated that. It was such a huge turnaround. Like when I first started reading it the first time, it was such a slog. It was so hard to get into. I couldn't find my footing. And then by the end, I was so invested in these people and I just cried because it was over. This time I didn't cry. The second time I didn't cry. But I think that that's because it was a familiar experience reading it a second time, but it was also genuinely a new experience reading it a second time. And I realized that I can go back to it a third time or a fourth time. And it's such a big book. It's such a hugely populated book that I am going to find a new experience with it each time. And it was genuinely, it was like curling up in a warm blanket. If you haven't read the Pickwick Papers, it is definitely worth it. I will tell you, it's probably going to be a slow start for you, but by the end, you're going to be totally invested, and it's so worth it. It's so worth it. You get this sentimental, attachment to the Pickwickians, and yeah, I love it. I love it. I know, like I said, I know it's not his best work, but I think it's definitely one of my top 5 favorites of Dickens. I finished reading, I started this in October, but I finished reading The Haunting of Brynn Wilder by Wendy Webb, and that was it fit with all of those other October type reads that I was reading. It was a nice little, thriller, mystery, ghost story that also happens to have just a lot of holes in it. Wendy Webb always does. But that's not what I go to Wendy Webb for. I go to Wendy Webb for a nice, chilling story. And that's what it was. And I enjoyed it for what it was. It was suspenseful. It was captivating. And I read it fairly quickly once I got into it. I do find with Wendy Webb, I always struggle a little bit to get into the story. But once I'm there, I'm there. Once I'm there, I'm there. So if you enjoy a good ghost story, I do suggest Wendy Webb. The Haunting of Brynn Wilder, and what's the other one? There's a couple in the same world, but dealing with different characters from that world. Oh, I'm not going to remember. But the other one I read that takes place in the same world, I think there are 3, but I've only read 2. The other one is... oh goodness, I can't remember. But it's about a woman who takes over an art retreat center, and they take place in the same place, but there's no real crossover in the stories. I read Emma Donohue's Haven, and I did not like it. It's so slow. I mean, it is incredibly observant, and it's Emma Donohue, so it's also well written. It's beautiful. But it is so slow to develop into anything. It's about some monks that follow another monk who's kind of a mega monk. Everybody reveres this guy. He's larger than life, and he's supposed to be just the greatest. He's like a megastar monk, and he ends up showing up at this monastery, and he has a vision, and he says, I need to take, you and you with me to this island, and we need to remove ourselves, and we need to live in abject poverty and isolation, and we need to have as little as possible, and we can create this amazing community and be what monks should be. And these people, because of his reputation, and because I think a little pride at being chosen, they decide to go with him. And it's a great premise, but wow, it's a dull book. And I kept thinking, like, I read it to the end. I wanted to DNF so many times, but I kept thinking, like, it's short and it's Emma Donoghue. Something's gonna happen at some point, and it just really never does. It's a very cerebral book. It probably wasn't what I was in the mood for, but it also, I think it just is. And I think it's meant to be. It's intentional. This is not what Emma Donoghue normally writes like. She's definitely doing this on purpose, but it was just not the book for me. It was not the book for me. I do wonder if, now that I know what's happening and I know what it is and I know what to anticipate, if in a few years I could reread it and get more out of it than disappointment. So I would like to do that. So I'm going to keep it on my shelf because I do think that there's something there. But for me in this moment, it was not the book. It was just not the book. That is not to say you should not read the book. That is to say it's not like other Emma Donoghue books, in my opinion. I read The Ravine by Wendy Lower, a family, a photograph, a Holocaust massacre revealed. Not revered. Wrong word. Revealed. What this is a close look at one photograph and then like deep dive research and revelation into each part of that photograph. So it is a like zoom in history telling the larger history of the Holocaust using one photograph, and it's incredibly well done. And if I was teaching older students again, I would definitely be using this as a guide to research, really. But it is also just a powerful story about the Holocaust. It's a powerful story about man's inhumanity to man. It's heartbreaking. It's terribly difficult to read at times. It is also like a work of genius. Again, not for the faint of heart. Very difficult read emotionally. But really important read. And like I said, if I was teaching older students, I would use it in my classroom for sure. Eliza Reid, who happens to also be the First Lady of Iceland, wrote a book called The Secrets of the Sprekar, Iceland's Extraordinary Women and How They Are Changing the World. This is a nonfiction. It is about, as you can see, I have a lot of sticky notes in there. I loved this book. It is about Iceland and how they do equality and where they fail at equality. It is her memoir. It is basically each chapter is kind of an extended journalistic essay, kind of, where there is some background information, some personal memoir story, some interview with another Icelandic woman, and then every 2 or 3 chapters there is a history, like a woman from one of the sagas. Her story is told. It's just beautiful. I really liked it. I've never read anything quite like it before, and it felt refreshing to me, and it felt very interesting to me. It was a nice history of not just women in Iceland, but a nice history of women in other places. The author herself, although she's the First Lady of Iceland and she is married to an Icelandic man and her children are from Iceland, she is from Canada. and they both lived and met each other in England. She's a journalist, and she's done backpacking trips around Asia and Africa. Like, she has a lot of international experience, and I always appreciate reading from the perspective of somebody who has personal experience with the whole world. That is who I am as well. Like, I have traveled the world and spent significant amounts of time in places that are very different to my own comfort zone and my own like worldview and how I was raised. Well, actually, how I was raised was moving around. So maybe not how I was raised. But they confirmed how I was raised. And I know that there aren't one or two ways to do life in the world, you know? And so to read from the perspective of a woman who also works under the automatic assumption that there are not one or two ways to do life in the world, felt really comfortable to me. I really loved it. I loved it. I felt like she said things the way that I would say things, having knowledge that I don't yet have. So it felt really, really like revelatory to me in a lot of ways. It was also very interesting to me to read about, even though this is a book that on the front cover sells itself as like, this is what Iceland gets right, this is how Iceland treats women, and this is what they get right. It was a very, very transparent about what they don't get right and where they still need to grow. And I don't know, I just really loved it. I loved it. Anyway, a very long time later, I have finished my wrap up. That is what I read in November. That was a lot of books without even trying. Now I did have, it felt good. Like, it felt effortless. That's what I mean by without even trying. Like, it felt effortless. With the exception of Haven, at no point did I feel like I had to read one of these books. I wanted to read every single one of these books. And so I think this was a great reading month, one of the best of the year for me. I loved it. It was a great month. I'm looking at my stack. I'm sitting here like staring longingly at my stack going, I want to read you all again. Except for Haven. I don't want to read that one again quite yet. Anyway, great reading month. What did you read in November? If you haven't already done your wrap up, if you've already done your wrap up, I've probably already watched it because it was Thanksgiving break. I had multiple days off. I caught up on all my book too. I feel accomplished. I have been reading December books, and I am actually going to turn this video off and then go and finish up my first video for Vlogmas. I'm going to do 4 Vlogmas videos this year. Roughly one a week until January. And maybe I should call it Bookmas or something else. It's not really Vlogmas. But I have just, a little short check-in. I'm going to do some reading vlogs and kind of check in on the books that I read all December. And I've been reading books for my December TBR since Thanksgiving. So, oops. I couldn't resist. And I'm loving those books so much. I'm gonna have more favorites of the year. I'm gonna have more favorites of the year. And I also accidentally did a birthday book haul, even though I said I wasn't going to do any. So that video will be coming in December as well, when those books arrive from Book Outlet, Amazon, Book Depository, and Better World Books. Oops. I'm not even gonna try to defend myself. Anyway, this little girl is sleeping. We've got the fire going. We've got the tree lit. And I need to finish this up and get this posted because it's December 1st. November is done. It's wrapped up. Then when I'm done with all of that, I'm gonna spend the rest of my snow day reading. So let's go read.